the face of mounting pressure from key allies, including the United States, Britain and Germany, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remains steadfast in his opposition to a two-state solution.
I want them to be focused on how to save civilian lives.
Over the last few days, the US and its European allies in particular have outlined what is their vision for the future of Gaza: an interim government supervised by the Palestinian Authority and the eventual establishment of a Palestinian state alongside the State of Israel. But Netanyahu is not willing to play ball. Shortly after a press conference where they made the admission that the Israeli army had shot dead 3 hostages in Gaza, an incident that has sparked anger among Israelis, Netanyahu seemed determined to shift the narrative. Instead of addressing that tragic event where 3 Israeli hostages were killed despite them raising white flags, the Israeli Prime Minister boasted about his role in preventing the creation of a Palestinian state. He used the current conflict in Gaza to emphasize the worst fears among Israelis coming true. This is what he said, and I quote, "I take pride in preventing a Palestinian state because now we all see what that state in Gaza looks like." Netanyahu made this declaration at a news conference on Saturday night. He also went on to say that capitulating to international pressure would have led to a similar state on the West Bank. As Netanyahu strives to maintain political power amidst this ongoing conflict and perhaps beyond it, he is now strategically trying to align himself with those Israelis who share a deep mistrust of Palestinians and also those who outright reject a two-state solution. This includes members of his Likud party and the current far-right coalition that he heads. There are extreme right parties who are part of this coalition, and he's trying to appease that extreme right of Israeli politics. Now, despite Benjamin Netanyahu's efforts, the rising number of casualties in this war and the continued captivity of Israeli hostages in Gaza are undermining his political standing. The recent killing of Israeli hostages, not in a rescue attempt, but by their own soldiers who mistook them for being Hamas fighters, that intensifies the arguments that the aggressive military campaign being run by Israel is not just jeopardizing the captives, but it's also tarnishing Israel's reputation abroad. Raz Ben-Ami, a former hostage released by Hamas, had previously warned about the potential harm that this aggressive military campaign could do to captives during this conflict. Tragically, her concerns were validated with her husband, who was still being held in Gaza, who died in captivity over the weekend. The delay in Netanyahu expressing any form of regret or remorse for these deaths, that adds to the criticism that he's facing. Even the Israeli Chief of Army Staff and the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who are leading this war effort, they did issue apologies, but they were also accused of falling short of accepting accountability for what had transpired with the Israeli hostages. In fact, prominent Israeli commentator Nahum Barnea has gone one step further, characterizing these deaths of the hostages as not just a tragedy, but a war crime under international law. He's also called for introspection, emphasizing that blind love during wartime brings no positive outcomes. The toll of this conflict is also very stark. Hamas's invasion on the 7th of October resulted in over 1,000 Israelis dying and the taking of more than 200 hostages. Israeli forces, in turn, are responsible for nearly 20,000 Palestinian deaths in Gaza, according to official estimates by the Gazan Health Ministry. Military expert Yaghil Levy points to a noticeable gap between what are the formal rules of engagement and the actual practices on the battlefield. Now, what he's suggesting is that these rules are not being consistently followed by Israeli forces on the ground, and that is bringing Israel a bad name. International criticism is mounting as well. with President Joe Biden condemning Israel's indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. This sentiment was echoed by the foreign ministers of Britain and Germany, who expressed support for Israel's right to confront Hamas on the one hand, but they did urge more precision in distinguishing between terrorists and civilians. David Cameron and Anna Baerbock, the foreign ministers of Britain and Germany, made this clear in a joint newspaper article that they penned over the weekend. Meanwhile, the French foreign minister, during his visit to Israel this past week, has called for a truce, further highlighting the need for what many see as the only solution, and that is a diplomatic resolution. Netanyahu will have to hear more of this line from US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Netanyahu's handling of this crisis has invited additional criticism because he's been openly engaging in political maneuvers amid wartime. He's been accused of campaigning against his main political rival, Benny Gantz, whom he brought into the emergency war cabinet in a bid to try and project national unity. Even Netanyahu acknowledges the imperative of incorporating the secular strand of Palestinian politics into any future solution. He needs to recognize that the Palestinian Authority, as flawed as it is, still represents the best-case scenario in a post-Hamas Gaza. Benny Gantz is widely seen as more open to dealing with the PA in a post-war Gaza. The killing of the hostages intensifies pressure on the Israeli government to engage in fresh negotiations for the release of the other hostages. Remember, there are still over 120 Israeli and foreign nationals who were taken captive by Hamas who are still in different parts of Gaza. Demonstrations by the families of hostages is continuing to be on the rise. That is also contributing to a prevailing sense that time is running out for those who are still in captivity. There are also reports suggesting that some may have already died or been killed by Hamas out of the 100+ who are still set to be in Hamas custody. As Netanyahu grapples with criticism that's coming in from multiple fronts and the urgency of addressing the hostage situation increases, his political survival becomes increasingly uncertain. The volatile and intricate dynamics in the region are adding a further layer of complexity to these challenges. That is something that Israel is facing both domestically, and its leader in particular embodies the kind of challenges that this military campaign has thrown open. This is a narrative you're going to see in the last few weeks of this year and perhaps leading into 2024 as well, a distinction between the Israeli war effort and the need to avenge what happened on October 7th and the flawed politics best symbolized by its embattled leader.